We're going to show how to play FAZA in a game set up for 2 players. And we'll be doing this over 2 example rounds of the game. I'm going to be doing a number of stops and tangents throughout this video to explain rules and strategies as they come up. The overarching objective is to eliminate the 3 FAZA motherships. In order to take out the motherships, we'll need to use our player cards, which have various movement abilities and special abilities. Once we've reached a mothership, we'll need to move the Rebel FAZA, the purple cubes, over to the mothership in order to attack it and damage it, eventually defeating the mothership over time. The best course of action for red and yellow is to go for one of the motherships and focus on them, but red can't leave her tile because there are drones on the tile with her. Drones prevent players from leaving tiles, acting like a barrier to get to the motherships. We can see that yellow is free to move since there are no drones on her tile. So for these 2 players to reach one of the motherships, red is going to have to engage in combat to allow herself to eventually move. To engage in combat, all red has to do is roll dice. Let's say for a moment that she rolled a 2, 3, and a 4. And she rolled 3 dice because there are 3 drones. You roll 1 die per drone. Any die that's 3 or less results in an injury. Anything that is 4 or more results in a successful kill. Let's line up these drones with the dice. You have 1 injury, another injury, and a successful kill. For example, let's say before red rolled her dice, she decided to use one of her ray guns. That means she spends one of her player cards showing a ray gun. She uses the ray gun and gets to add 1 to all her dice. So the dice now become a 3, a 4, and a 5, meaning that red gets 2 kills and 1 injury. Since this is an example, let's also show the case where she used 2 ray guns before rolling dice. So the combat abilities at the bottom of the cards are used before players roll dice. This would allow her to add 2 to all her dice. So the dice become a 4, a 5, and a 6, resulting in all drones being killed. One more thing to remember during combat is if you're on a tile that matches your color and symbol, you automatically gain a terrain advantage and are allowed to add 1 to all your dice. Think of it as your knowledge of terrain gives you a combat advantage. So now that we've gone through an example of how combat works, let's do a real combat roll. In this situation, since red is already gaining 1 to all dice from being on a red tile, we can play it safe by spending a single ray gun to add an additional 1 to all dice for a total of 2 to all our dice. This is a pretty good roll. And it's also good that we decided to use the ray gun before rolling because we get to add 2 to all our dice. So we meet the minimum requirement of 4 in order to kill all 3 drones on the tile. Now, these 3 drones are removed from the board, and red gets to hold on to them as points, which can eventually be spent to recruit more of the friendly Rebel FAZA, which we need in order to attack the motherships. Let's do one additional example where we sustain an injury. If I didn't use this ray gun, I would have sustained 1 injury. The way injuries are sustained is that you flip the player card with the lowest number that's not yet injured. In this case, it's the number 1 player card. The injury is sustained regardless of whether the player card has been spent or not. If, for example, the number 1 player card was already injured, the number 2 card would have to flip, and then the number 3 card, and eventually the 4th injury results in death, and game over for your team loses. But that was just an example, and we didn't lose, at least not yet. We were instead able to successfully influence the outcome of combat by using our ray gun and taking advantage of the tile to add 2 to all of our dice. Now, one more function that Rebel FAZA serve is that they also count as extra health. If you're on a tile with Rebel FAZA, the rebels take injuries for you before you would take an injury on any one of your cards. This is something that always happens. You don't have a choice in who takes the injury. The rebels always take the injury first. An important aspect of FAZA's game is their turn order. It's not enforced. So this means that red can do as many actions as they want, and then yellow can do as many actions as they want, because all actions they could possibly take are self-limiting. So they can go at the same time or go back and forth, and this extends to 3 or 4 players as well. So once red uses all her cards and once yellow uses all her cards, and there are no more actions the players can possibly take, which are the actions described on the back of your player card, the team phase is over, and then the FAZA phase begins. And then once the FAZA do their turn, the players get their cards back. So there's this back and forth between the FAZA and the players. Now getting back to the game we're playing. At this point, red has already used one of her cards, and the plan is to go after the green mothership, the former ship. At this point, red decides to use a bazooka plus a ray gun. This means red is able to gain an advantage of +2 and is engaging in combat against the drones on the adjacent tile. She rolls 3 dice because there are 3 drones on the adjacent tile. We now add 2 to each of these dice. The result is a 5, 6, and 8, which means all 3 drones are dead and we keep them as points. Red then spends 2 points to recruit a friendly Rebel FAZA, which is one of the possible actions on the team phase card. Now, yellow decides to help red out by using one of her movements to move these rebels over 1 tile. Then, yellow uses the airplane to move herself 2 tiles over to the former ship. The players are now in a position to attack this mothership. To attack a mothership, you must be on the tile with the mothership with at least 1 Rebel FAZA. You can then command the rebel to board the mothership, removing it from the board. Then you injure the mothership by 1, and you get to flip over a FAZA card. FAZA cards can be good or bad. They're mostly bad, but in this case, we got a reward. We got a hoverboard. The card says, you've created a hoverboard from FAZA technology. This card is permanently yours. Spend 1 point to move 1 additional tile when using Run. The person that attacked the mothership and drew the card keeps the card. If we wanted to, at this point, we could choose to keep attacking. One helpful tangent I forgot to mention earlier. There's also a reference card on the back side of the difficulty mode cards. These cards describe how to engage in mothership combat. Now back to the game. Yellow decides to attack again. So we remove 1 rebel, decrease the mothership's health by 1, and we flip over another FAZA card. This card we just drew is a harmful card because it's going to slow our attack against the mothership. This card has 2 parts. The top part, which says add 2 drones, and these 2 drones get added to the mothership's tile. Then there's the bottom part, titled AA Guns. The card says, the FAZA deploy anti-aircraft guns on tiles with drones. If you fly over tiles with drones, you'll be forced to land on that tile. And this is a short duration card, which means its effect lasts until the next FAZA card is drawn. We place short cards on top of the FAZA deck to remind us of the effect. There are 4 different types of durations for FAZA cards: instant, short, long, and rewards. We can learn about how each one works by consulting the rulebook. Now back to the game. Since drones were added to the mothership's tile, we can't continue attacking until we eliminate those drones. So at this point, Red decides to use another bazooka to help Yellow out. Red is going to combat the drones on the mothership's tile and will be able to add 1 to all her dice because she's on a red tile. She now rolls 2 dice because there are 2 drones on the adjacent tile. She eliminates 1, keeps it as a point. Since we're attacking at range with the bazooka, this injury does not apply to us. So Yellow is stuck on this tile until she can eliminate this drone. She decides to use her shield before rolling to protect herself and everyone else on the tile from injuries. She rolled a 5, kills the drone, keeps it as a point. Now Yellow is in a position to attack the mothership again. She commands the rebel to board the mothership. Its health is decreased by 1. This effect is gone, so we can put it in the discard pile and draw the next FAZA card. The top part of this FAZA card says add 2 drones, so we add those 2 to the mothership's tile. Now let's continue to the rest of the card. This card is titled Maintenance. It says, the FAZA activate their automated maintenance robot, repairing hull damage. Instead of receiving damage, the mothership repairs itself, ignoring your attack. So this mothership's health goes back to 2. At this point, the players are in a tough spot. We shouldn't have been so ambitious to attack the mothership again. Yellow is stuck on the tile, since there are drones on the tile with her. Remember that drones prevent players from leaving tiles. If this wasn't easy mode, there's a high likelihood that we would lose when the FAZA take their turn. But since it's easy mode, we should survive until the next round. Yellow could theoretically combat the drones, but is worried about what might happen during the FAZA phase. So she decides not to combat the drones. There aren't any more decent actions Yellow could take. Red could recruit some rebels. That's a decent action. Let's do that. Those rebels might protect Red when the FAZA take their turn. Yellow uses her last card to recruit 1 more rebel and places it on Red's outpost. With no more actions to take, the team phase is now over. The FAZA phase begins. All that entails is following the steps outlined on the easy mode difficulty card. The first step says motherships move. Repeat the following as many times as players. Shift, movement tracker, right once. This is the movement tracker. It moves over once to the destroyer ship. The next step on easy mode says mothership with tracker activates, follow steps on its card. The first step on the destroyer card says move. The way the destroyer moves is described at the bottom of its card. The card says, move destroyer 2 tiles closer to closest player. Highest number tile breaks tie. The closest player to the destroyer is Red, at 1 tile away, so the destroyer is placed on the same tile as Red. Movement in FAZA is always in straight lines. No one in FAZA can ever move diagonally. The next step on the destroyer card says, kill all rebels on tile, so these 3 rebels we recruited are actually going to die. We remove them from the board. The next step says, all players on tile receive 1 injury. I look at these 4 cards, and my lowest card that's uninjured receives an injury. Finally, it says to drop 3 drones. We grab 3 drones from this pool and we place it on this tile. Now that we've finished activating the destroyer, we go back to the easy mode card. We did the mothership movement once for one of the players, and we're going to have to shift the movement tracker again and activate the next mothership for the second player. The former ship now activates. Step 1. It says move. Its movement is different than the destroyer. Its card says move the former to an adjacent tile that's not yet FAZA formed. highest numbered tile breaks tie. So there are 4 tiles adjacent to the former that have not yet been FAZA formed. So between these 4 tiles, 11 is the highest numbered tile that hasn't been flipped over. It's going to move to this tile. The next step on the former ship card says flip the tile the ship is on. We already flipped the tile. Step 3, it's going to move again. It's now looking to move to an adjacent tile that's not yet FAZA formed. Since the tile it just came from is already FAZA formed, it can't go back. It's going to go to one of these 3 tiles. And between those 3, the highest numbered tile is 10. It moves here and flips the tile. The last step says drop 2 drones. So we place 2 drones on that tile. Now that we've finished activating the former ship, we look back at the easy mode card. We did the mothership movement twice since there are 2 players, and we move on to the next step. The card says the FAZA phase is over, players regain all used cards. So we rotate our cards back. Notice that injured cards remain injured and injuries can be healed at outposts. And on easy mode, that's all that really happens during the FAZA phase. The motherships move around and they wreak havoc. So far, we've done 1 example round of FAZA. The players did their communal turn once, and the FAZA did their turn once, and as the game continues, it's always going to be this back and forth between the players doing their actions and the FAZA doing their actions. At this point, the players are in a pretty tight spot, and they have to figure out how to get off these tiles to continue chasing down and focusing on one of the motherships. Red's first action is to recover her injured card. The bottom of her card says recover. If at an outpost and this card is not spent, flip this card over. This card is now spent. So we flip this card over, and this card is now spent. Red then decides to combat the drones on her tile. She spends a ray gun and then rolls 3 dice because there are 3 drones on her tile. Wow, that's a pretty good roll. They all die, and Red gets the points. Red now recruits 2 rebels by spending 4 points. And the rebels have to be placed on one of the outposts, and it's placed on Red's outpost, which currently the mothership is also on. Red then decides to help Yellow out on the adjacent tile. She uses her bazooka and ray gun together and rolls 2 dice. This die becomes a 7, and this one becomes a 4 because she got +1 from the ray gun and +1 from the tile she's on. So both of the drones are killed and kept as points. Now, Red commands a rebel to board and damage the destroyer. So we decrease the mothership's health by 1 and we flip over a FAZA card. The top part of the card says add 2 drones. Let's do that. And this card is titled Off Guard. The card says, the FAZA anticipate your strategy and catch you off guard. Cut the team phase short. The FAZA phase starts right now. Okay, so this was a pretty terrible card to draw in our situation because Yellow didn't even get a chance to use any of her cards. Only Red used her cards. So yeah, the FAZA have caught us off guard. This is one of the more difficult cards that can be drawn depending on timing. Alright, so let's start the FAZA phase. We follow the steps on the easy mode card. We shift the movement tracker once to the right. It lands on the carrier. The first step for the carrier is to move. Movement for the carrier is different than the other 2 motherships. The carrier's movement says, move the carrier to an adjacent tile with the fewest drones. Highest numbered tile breaks tie. Between these 3 adjacent tiles, it says the highest numbered tile breaks tie, so it goes to number 9. The next step is to drop 2 drones. However, since there are already 2 drones on this tile, it can only place 1 additional drone for the max of 3 per tile. The next step says move again. This tile has the fewest drones, so it moves here. Next, it says to drop 2 more drones, so we place 2 drones here. Next step says move again. So between these 3 adjacent tiles, number 6 has the fewest drones, it moves here, and then does the last step, which is to drop 2 more drones. We finished activating the carrier, and looking back at the easy mode card, we have to activate the movement tracker one more time for the second player. The movement tracker shifts right once and activates the destroyer. So we follow the steps outlined on the destroyer. Since the destroyer will move 2 tiles closer to the closest player, it's not going to move because it's already on the tile with the closest player. Next step says all rebels on the tile die. Next, all players on the tile take an injury, so red takes an injury. Next, we drop off 3 drones, but since there are already 2 drones on the tile, we only place 1 drone because it's a max of 3 per tile. The destroyer is done activating, and we did the mothership movement twice, once for each player, and the next step on the easy mode card says the FAZA phase is over, and players regain all used cards. Red regains all her spent cards. Fortunately, of the 34 FAZA cards in the game, there's only 1 of each, so we won't get caught off guard with this card again. I'm going to stop the FAZA demo at this point because we touched upon every single game mechanic that you'll encounter throughout the game. We've gone over how the player cards allow for movements and dice enhancements for combat. We've seen how motherships get attacked, how they move across the board, how to recruit rebels in order to attack motherships, how the motherships follow their cards, and how the FAZA phase unfolds. Eventually, as the game progresses, there's always going to be this back and forth between the players and the FAZA. So, the players get to do their stuff, and the FAZA get to do their stuff, and typically what's going to happen, the players will discuss how they think they'll proceed. They'll try to do their actions to see if their plan unfolds the way they thought it would, and then they proceed or regroup to rethink their strategy. Other things that will eventually happen: the former ship will snake its way around the board, flipping tiles over. The destroyer will continue chasing down players, trying to injure them. The carrier is going to continue going around dropping off more drones, and each of these motherships focuses on a different lose condition. There are several ways that players can lose at the game of FAZA. For example, if any player dies, they get the death card and the entire team loses. Or if all the outposts are flipped over by the former ship, players lose. And if all the drones are on the board and we can't draw another drone, the players also lose. And these 3 lose conditions are only for easy mode. The hardest difficulty also introduces a 4th lose condition. If all rebels are not on the board, the players also lose. So we've gone over 2 rounds of how to play FAZA. This game involves a lot of strategy and group discussion, trying to think and plan ahead, and I hope you enjoyed the entire demo. If you have any questions about anything you saw, or if you want to say hello, send us an email through our website at thefaza.com. Thanks for watching.